Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph and Daf Zayin Amud Beis. Let's begin by looking at the general outline of this piece of Gemara. In the previous Gemara, we discussed the part of the Brisa that spoke about a Carmelist. Earlier, we presented a Brisa, and in that Brisa, we learned about the four Rishayos of Shabbos: a Rosh Hashanah, a Rosh Hashanah, a Carmelist, and a Mokim Petur. The Gemara discussed the first part of the Brisa that speaks about a Rosh Hashanah and a Rosh Hashanah. Then the Gemara went on to discuss, and this is in the previous piece of Gemara, the part of the Brisa that speaks about a Carmelist. So in that regard, that we're speaking about a Carmelist, the Gemara now will continue in its discussion of a Carmelist. And there's two parts to this piece of Gemara. Number one, the Gemara will present cases of places in the Rosh Hashanah that are not part of the Rosh Hashanah, but rather they are a Carmelist or Mokim Petur. And number two, the Gemara will outline the parameters of a Carmelist and what it's based on. And before we begin this piece of Gemara, we'll just point out that very often we speak about a Carmelist and a Mokim Petur in the same Gemara because they're oftentimes very, very similar. And the only difference at times might be simply that the area has 4 Tfachim by 4 Tfachim or more, and therefore it'll be a Carmelist. Or if it doesn't have 4 Tfachim by 4 Tfachim, it's smaller than that, then it'll be a Mokim Petur. So this piece of Gemara has those two parts. Number one, we're going to present cases of areas in the Rosh Hashanah that are not considered part of the Rosh Hashanah, rather they're a Carmelist or a Mokim Petur. Number two, the Gemara is going to outline the parameters of a Carmelist. So let's see the Gemara now in the flowchart form. So in the previous piece of Gemara, we learned about a Carmelist. We presented the Brisa, and we spoke about the part of the Brisa that discusses a Carmelist. And number two, we presented a teaching from Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan, which is that V'ha-Carmelist, the word V'ha-Carmelist in the Brisa is referring to a Keren Zavis, a Smuchel Rosh Hashanah, a corner that's right off the Rosh Hashanah. So it's right touching the Rosh Hashanah, but it's a corner, and that area is a Carmelist. And considering that we're speaking about a Carmelist, and presented a teaching from Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan about a Carmelist in the Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara now presents another teaching from Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan about a Carmelist in the Rosh Hashanah. And the teaching is that between the pillars, it's a Carmelist. Between the pillars refers to, they would have a Rosh Hashanah, and beside the Rosh Hashanah, there were people selling stuff. And the way they would sell stuff is they would have pillars or posts, beams, where they would hang things up that were for sale, and they'd also sit on blocks that were in front of them. In front of the pillars there would be blocks where the merchants, the sellers would sit and sell what they had for sale. So Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan's teaching is that between the pillars it's a Carmelist, and he explains in his teaching what's the reason. So it's not asked as a question, it's just completing the teaching. So it's part of it. What's the reason that this area is a Carmelist? Since one cannot walk there comfortably, the pillars were set up in such a way it wasn't a straight row, rather they were set up randomly. People couldn't walk comfortably through them, and therefore that area, since it's not used properly and comfortably by the public, it's not part of the Rosh Hashanah, rather it's a Carmelist. The Gemara now goes on and presents another teaching related to this, and that is a teaching from Rabbi Zera Amar Rav Yehuda, that the blocks in front of the pillars are a Carmelist. So he teaches not about the area between the pillars, but rather the blocks where the merchants sat. He says those blocks are a Carmelist. So if somebody placed something on the block, he placed something on a Carmelist. And now the Gemara continues and talks about these two teachings, compares them in a way, and says as follows: Lamanda Amar, according to the one that speaks about between the pillars, according to Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan, it says that between the pillars is a Carmelist. So what we're going to say is, so for sure the blocks are a Carmelist. If between the pillars it's a Carmelist, where people are able to walk, it's just not comfortable. Certainly the blocks themselves are a Carmelist because they're more than 3 Tfachim above the ground, which makes it uncomfortable and inconvenient for people to walk there, and people don't walk there at all. People don't step on the blocks to walk. So if between the pillars it's a Carmelist, certainly on the blocks it's a Carmelist. Lamanda Amar, but according to the one that speaks of the blocks and says the top of the blocks is a Carmelist, what we're going to say is as follows: it's only true for the blocks that they are a Carmelist, but between the pillars where it's comfortable to walk, then no, it's not a Carmelist. Because if Rabbi Zera wanted us to know, and if he held that both of them are Carmelists, he would have said between the pillars it's a Carmelist, and we would say if there it's a Carmelist, for sure on top of the blocks is a Carmelist, like we say by Rabbi Yechanan. Rav Zera Amar Rav Yehuda chose rather to say that on top of the blocks is a Carmelist, which indicates specifically there where it's highly uncomfortable and completely irregular for people to walk there, then it's a Carmelist. But between the pillars where people could walk, just it's not so comfortable, then it will not be a Carmelist, rather it's a Rosh Hashanah because it's considered comfortable relative to walking on the blocks. And now the Gemara presents a Lishna Achrina, another version of the words that we just read, and it goes as follows. We'll just start off by reading from the previous part. It's only true for the blocks, but between the pillars where the public sometimes walk, it's a Rosh Hashanah. But at any rate, the point we're making is that compared to on top of the blocks, the area between the pillars is used by the public. It's comfortable for the public to some extent, and it's used by the public somewhat. Whereas on top of the blocks, it's not used at all. And therefore, there it's going to be a karmelis, but between the pillars, it won't. So here we presented the two teachings from Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yechanan and from Rav Zeira Amar Rav Yehuda, and we explained what each one holds about the other one's case. Now the Gemara continues in its discussion of a karmelis, presents another teaching. Amar Rabba Bar Shilei Amar Rav Chizda. He says as follows: if there was an upright brick, a levena, and one threw an object at it. So what is a levena? When we say levena in the Gemara, it's referring to a brick that has a specific size, and that is it's 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim on top of it. However, the height of the brick varies. It could be very low or it could be very high. So if it was low, meaning it was less than 3 tefachim, then we wouldn't have a discussion what the din is. The person will always be chayiv. It's talking about somebody who threw 4 amas and rishus harabim at the brick. He'll always be chayiv because anything within 3 tefachim is considered part of the rishus that it's in. So here we're referring to a brick, a levena, that's higher than 3 tefachim. And on top it has the parameters, that it's the size, that it's 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim. So the din is as follows. If it's stuck to it, when you say it was stuck to it, it means stuck to the face. Then he is chayiv, like we have the picture there. So he threw it at the brick and it stuck to the face of the brick. It was sticky. It was like a fig, a fatty fig, and it stuck to the face of the brick. He's chayiv, and the reason is because we view it as if it rested on the ground beneath it. And the ground beneath it is a rishus harabim. Like we said, the brick is in rishus harabim. So if it stuck to it, he is chayiv. And if it landed on it, like we have here in the picture, then he is pater. And the reason he's pater over here is because this is an area that's outside of the rishus harabim. It's more than 3 tefachim high. And when we say pater, we don't mean pater and aser, but rather pater and mutter. Because since it's 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, it's considered a makam p'tor. Because in order to be a karmelis, needs to be at least 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So in this case, the person is going to be pater and mutter. Since this is considered something outside of the rishus harabim because of its height, people don't comfortably include it in the rishus harabim, they will not walk on it. And now the Gemara is going to present 3 teachings that relate to this requirement that it needs to be 3 tefachim high to be considered outside of the rishus harabim. The Gemara is going to discuss whether there are any exceptions. Is there anything that's less than 3 tefachim and still considered outside of the rishus harabim? The Gemara is going to present an argument about this, but it's all said in the context of this teaching, and therefore it's pointing to the teaching. So Abaye and Rava both said this is only if it's 3 tefachim high, since people don't walk on it. Only then do we say he's pater because it's outside of the rishus harabim. And this is only true by a brick. But on thorns, one is pater even if they are in 3 tefachim high. Abaye and Rava say that we can either have 3 tefachim in order to create that it should be outside of the rishus harabim. Another way of doing that is by something that people don't walk on, like thorns. It's automatically out of the rishus harabim just by being thorns, because people don't walk there. And therefore, if somebody threw an item 4 amas in rishus harabim and it landed on thorns that are less than 3 tefachim by less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, so let's say the brick 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, he'll also be pater and mutter. Since people don't walk there, it's not part of the rishus harabim, rather it's a makom p'tor. The Gemara now presents an arguing opinion. Chia Barav comments on this teaching of Abaye and Rav and says, even by thorns one is chayiv if they are not 3 tefachim high. And like Rashi says, because people do walk on thorns if they're wearing shoes. So therefore it is considered part of the rishus harabim unless it has the height that removes it from the rishus harabim, the height of 3 tefachim. But not on feces. Not on feces do we say that a person's chayiv if it's not 3 tefachim high. Rather, even if it's not 3 tefachim high, a person is not going to be chayiv because people will not step on feces, and therefore it's automatically, just by being feces, it doesn't need any height, it's automatically removed from being considered part of the rishus harabim. And on that the Gemara presents the teaching of Rav Ashi that says even by feces one is chayiv if it's not 3 tefachim high. So Abaye and Rava say thorns are considered automatically separate from the rishus harabim. Chia Barav argues and says that it's not separate, but feces are automatically separate. And Rav Ashi says even feces are not considered separate. And he holds it's necessary to have the height in order to be considered separate. So this is the second series of teachings, or it's one teaching with commentary on it. The second teaching that we presented, and that is about a brick. And we said that if it's the face of the brick, then it's not considered outside of the rishus harabim. It's considered part of the rishus harabim. We view it as if it's resting on the ground beneath it. It's only if it's on top of the brick, where then we say that it's considered in the new rishus. And in this case, the new rishus was a makom p'tor, and we discussed whether we could accomplish making it a new rishus separate from the rishus harabim through being thorns or feces or not at all. Now the Gemara continues with its discussion of a karmelis, and since the structure of this Gemara is a little different, we changed the way the box is set up to accommodate just physically the way the flowchart is structured. So in continuation to the teaching of a karmelis, the Gemara says another teaching, and it's the teaching about what are the parameters of a karmelis. So we have 2 teachings. One is Amar Rabba Bar Shilei, Amar Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, A carmelis cannot be less than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So a carmelis, he's outlining the parameters of a carmelis, that it's not less than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. And then we have the teaching from Rab Sheshis. Rab Sheshis said, v'teifeses ad asara, and it gets up to 10 tvachim. So here we outline the parameters of a carmelis. Number one, it has to be 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, and number two, it's v'teifeses ad asara. So now there's going to be two parts to this piece of Gemara. Number one, the Gemara is going to ask and explain, what does it mean when it says v'teifeses ad asara? What do those words mean? And once we establish what that is, the Gemara is going to explain what it's based on, these two parameters of a carmelis. Number one, it has to be 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, and number two, it's v'teifeses ad asara. So let's start with the first, is the question. The Gemara asked, "My v'teifeses ad asara." What does it v'teifeses ad asara mean? And the Gemara supports this question by rejecting a possible answer. Like very often, it's going to be an arrow. The Gemara asks a question, what does it mean? And says, if you're going to tell me it means this, it can't mean because of that. So therefore, I have my question. So this is an arrow because it's supporting the question. And the Gemara says, if you'll say it means that only if the walls are 10 tefachim high, then it's a carmelis, and otherwise it's not. If that's how we're going to interpret the words v'teifeses ad asara, that a carmelis is an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim and has walls that are 10 tefachim high, that's a problem. Now you can say that otherwise it's not a carmelis. Is it not otherwise a carmelis if the walls are not 10 tefachim high? But Rav said that a house that's not 10 tefachim high and its roof makes it 10 tefachim. In other words, if a person walks into the house, the ceiling is less than 10 tefachim high. If he walks outside of the house, he sees that the house in total is 10 tefachim. So for example, the inside, the ear in the house is 9 tefachim, and the roof is another tefach, so inside it's 9 tefachim, outside you can see that it's 10 tefachim. The din is as follows, said Rav. On the roof a person can carry, because since it reached the height of 10 tefachim, it's a rishus hayachid. But inside a person can only carry within 4 amos. Since not a rishus hayachid, it's a carmel. So it's actually the opposite of what we want to say. How can we say that the tefeses ad asara, means that it has to have walls that are 10 tefachim high? Here we see the total opposite. That once it's 10 tefachim high, which is on the roof, it becomes a rishus hayachid. However, if it's not 10 tefachim high, like inside, then there's an issur to carry more than 4 amos. Then it's a carmelis. So the more answers that with the tefeses ad asara means, rather it means that up to 10 tefachim it's a carmelis. Above 10 tefachim it's not a carmelis. So now we set out the parameters. We outline the parameters of a carmelis, which is that it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and it extends up to 10 tefachim. Before the Gemara now explains what's this based on, the Gemara says that what we just said now is similar to what we said elsewhere. And it's all going to be in an arrow because it's just continuing as a side discussion what we said. So in other words, we already set down what v'teifeses ad asara means, and the Gemara says we actually find the same thing elsewhere. Like Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, he told him as follows. He said, Shinana, sharp one, don't talk about the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim. So the question is asked, what does this mean? What does it mean, don't talk about the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim? I just want to point out that we could set this up as a question and then answers, but since the whole thing is essentially just a side discussion, that we mentioned that v'teifeses ad asara means it extends up to 10 tefachim. We say we actually saw something similar, like Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, so the whole thing is an arrow. So the Gemara asks, what does this mean when it says, don't talk about the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim? It explains, if you'll say that what it means is that there's no rishus hayachid above 10 tefachim, don't talk about the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim, there's no rishus hayachid above 10 tefachim. But Rav Chisda said that if one stuck a pole in rishus hayachid and one threw an item onto it from the rishus harabim, he is chayiv because the rishus hayachid extends up to the sky. So we see that the rishus hayachid does go above 10 tefachim, so it can't mean that. So, and rather, what are you going to tell me? That there's no rishus harabim above 10 tefachim. So we're trying to figure out what does it mean when he says don't talk about the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim. It's obviously going to be referring to carrying, because we don't have the concept of the 10 tefachim by cooking, baking, and frying, or other malachas. So it's referring to carrying. So he says, what is he referring to? That there's no rishus hayachid above 10 tefachim? But we know there is. Is he saying that there's no rishus harabim above 10 tefachim? It can't either be that. So he's supporting the question here. That's a Mishnah. It says if a person throws 4 amos and rishus harabim onto a wall, the din is as follows. It's stuck onto the wall. Again, like we said, it's a dvela shmena, a fatty fig. So if it's above 10 tefachim, it's like throwing in the ear, because there's no rishus harabim above 10 tefachim. And if it's within 10 tefachim, it's like throwing on the ground. If it landed within 10 tefachim of the ground, we view it as if it's rested on the ground, and he's chayiv. So that's already a Mishnah. So what does it mean when he says, don't talk of the matters of Shabbos above 10 tefachim? What could he be referring to? It can't be referring to rishus hayachid, because it's not true. It can't be referring to rishus harabim, because we know that it's in a Mishnah. We don't need Shmuel to tell it to Rav Yehuda. Rather, it's referring to a carmelis. And he's saying that there's no carmelis above 10 tfachim. So we see we have the same exact teaching said elsewhere by Shmuel to Rav Yehuda that the carmelis only extends up to 10 tfachim. And now the final part of the Gemara explains. It's all referring to the teachings of Rabbi Bar Shili, Amar Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, the teaching of Rav Sheshes. The Gemara explains they gave it the kulas of Rosh Hashanah and the kulas of Rosh Hashanah. The kula of the Rosh Hashanah is that only if it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, it's a carmel. It's just like a Rosh Hashanah. The minimum size of Rosh Hashanah is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, and the kula of Rosh Hashanah they gave is that it's only up to 12 tfachim. Is it a carmelis and not more? So we basically gave it the leniencies of each of them. Just like a Rosh Hashanah needs 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim to be considered Rosh Hashanah. Smaller than that, it won't be Rosh Hashanah, rather a Makom P'tor. Same is true by the carmelis. If it's smaller than that, it will not be a Rosh Hashanah. It'll be a Makom P'tor. And we also gave it the kula of a Rosh Hashanah, which is that only up to 12 tfachim will it be a just like by Rosh Hashanah we say only up to 10 tfachim is a Rosh Hashanah. Beyond that is a Makom P'tor. So to the carmelis, only up to 10 tfachim is at a carmelis. Beyond that, it's a Makom P'tor. So to summarize the Gemara, we presented teachings about a carmelis. First we spoke about between the pillars and on top of the blocks. Then we spoke about a brick, which was really a Makom P'tor. And we spoke about over there the requirement of having the height of 3 tfachim if there's any exception to it. In the last part over here, we presented the parameters of a carmelis, which is that it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide and up to 10 tfachim high. We discussed what does the words v'tefeses ada sora mean. We showed what it must mean and brought from elsewhere a similar teaching. And we also explained what it's based on, these parameters. Why did they give them these parameters of a minimum of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide and only up to a height of 10 tfachim?